Awesome. Okay, what's up, everybody? Today we have my friend Jackie Michaud or Michaud
Show. You got it right.
with us, and we are going to be busting the myths of therapy. So I'm so excited you're here, girl. From the moment that we were introduced, thanks to I think Danae Osted, wasn't it? So we got to give her a big shout out. Because of her, we now have this new friendship, and it's been incredible. Just to get to know about how you help people and why you do what you do. And we both have a space for in our hearts for preventing teen suicide and helping people with mental health. But there's a lot of people that look at therapy and look at getting help as like a weakness, or there's a lot of myths out there. So I want to discuss those with you. But first, will you share with us who you are, where you work, what you do? So we just, we know who we're talking to.
Sure. So thank you so much, Alex, for having me on here. I'm excited to get to talk about what I do. It's always fun to get to nerd out a little bit about what you love.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, I'm a therapist. I'm a marriage and family therapist. I grew up here in Southeast Denver. I actually went to Denver Public School, went to State College at Colorado State University, got my bachelor's and my master's there. In marriage and family therapy. And my road to becoming a therapist is kind of an interesting one. I didn't actually know I wanted to be a therapist until I was in school. So I actually went to CSU because I thought I wanted to be a vet. I've always had a big heart, love of animals. And then I was 19, I was studying biomed science, getting ready to become a vet, and absolutely not doing very well with it. The chemistry and the math. And I felt like I was having this little crisis of like, well, I thought this was what I was going to do. I've been preparing for this, my adolescence when I was younger. And one day I called my dad and I'm just like, I can't do this. I'm not loving the vet thing. And he said, you know what, just come home for the summer. We'll figure out, what you want to do. Just give yourself a break. And that summer, one of his good friends' wife got sick with ALS. And she had actually been sick for a couple months before, but the family was having a hard time just, working with figuring out how to care for her. ALS is progressive and, you lose a lot of nerve function, muscular function over time. And so at the time, me and my older sister were both studying different science degrees and just decided we would help for the summer, help kind of take care of her and just be with her. And it was the first time I actually met a therapist firsthand. So, with her disease, the therapist came to the house, and because I was with her, I really got to see, what's therapy, and she would come in and talk with my friend and her kids just about the process of grieving and dealing with loss and how to communicate about it. And I was enthralled because it was so beautiful and so helpful. And it was like a light bulb moment went off in my head. I'm like, wow, I want to do something like this. I want to be a person who helps people navigate the really tough parts of their lives. So I went back to school, started studying psychology, and the rest is kind of history. So I've worked all over the Front Range over the last 10 years or so, doing different jobs in therapy and Fort Collins, Cheyenne, Denver. So now I work in the DTC. So back where I started, which is really cool.
Yes, it is. It's super awesome to be able to have things come full circle. And because when we're going through life's challenges, it can be really difficult to see why. Why am I going through such this big struggle? But when you can look back and because I'm sure it wasn't easy for you to decide, you were far into going into veterinarian care, right? You're far into it, and then to come back and be like, yo, I want to do something different. Mm-hmm. That's crazy. That's like a lot of people be like, wow, that's incredible to restart and to come back. And then now you're back where you started and you're close to your parents and you get to,
yeah,
you get to help people in an incredible way. And you've been doing this for 10 years, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, almost. Yes. I started seeing clients in 2012. So this is year 8.
So cool. Okay. So lots to talk about there that we're going to in just a little bit, but I really want to jump into these myths, girl. And so tell me, okay, so one of them is like, like therapy is only for people that are going through, are super messed up, like have traumatic childhoods, or, like you said, have lost a loved one. Like, I'm fine. I really don't need therapy. I'm not crazy. I got it all under control. So is that true or is that false? Let's bust the myth.
I think that's very false. So over my years, I would say that probably 80% of the clients that I've seen and that are seen in general are not considered like extremely clinically distressed, right? They're not going through something that's life-threatening, and I think for a lot of people, it just takes a lot of bravery to say, like, I need a space so that I can thrive, right? Like, I think a lot of people come to some point in their life, kind of like what I did with my vet school thing, like where it's just like, this isn't the right fit. I don't really know why. I don't know if there's something, going on with like how I conceptualize myself based on my past. There's a lot of questions people have. And one of the things I like to remind people, and myself too sometimes, is like, we can't be objective in our own lives. Like, our own experience is biased, and being with a professional who can help you understand the way that you operate, it's really helpful to get that insight. The Monet exhibit was just here, all last winter. And of course, lots of us went to go see it. And I feel like thinking of a Monet painting is a really good way to think of therapy. It's like you could stand super close to the picture and be like, well, that just looks like a lot of green. I don't know what that is. I don't know how to make sense of that. And I kind of feel like that's how people feel about their own emotional experiences. Like, well, I got something going on. I don't really know what it is. But like the process of therapy, because a professional helper is objective, they can help you take a step back, look at things a little bit differently, feel them a little bit different. I think for a lot of people, diving into your past or your emotional experience is kind of like opening Pandora's box, right? Like, I don't know what's in there. I know I've been through some stuff. I've shoved some things down, and I'm really worried if I open it, number one, I'm not going to know what to do with any of it, or it's going to be this like all-encompassing, really painful thing that I'm not going to be able to handle. So let's just not go there. And that process of avoidance can just be really stressful and painful. So that's, I think, a big part of what therapy is it's a place where somebody can help you kind of hold that container of emotion, help you sort through it, make sure that you can like emotionally and physically actually handle whatever you find, when you're looking back or thinking about the future.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you're absolutely right when you talk about getting like an objective view. I've had therapy not since I can remember, but it started in my teenage years, right? And it was forced upon me by my amazing mom. I'm grateful that she did that. And I've had therapists since, and I think there might be, having someone who's not emotionally tied to what you're going through is also super duper helpful because they're on your side. Mm-hmm. They are team Jackie. They're team Alex, or whoever's watching this. They're team you. They're not going to come in with these. They're trained. Y'all are trained not to have biased opinions, and which means leaning one way or the other. Like, you're going to give them like you said, an objective view. You're not attached. And it helps us open our mind a little bit to what's going on and feel like we have someone that's supporting us, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay. So that brings us to the next myth, that when someone goes to a therapist, right, someone that maybe never been, you're just laying on a couch, just talking about all of your feelings and your whole life story. And the therapist is sitting there going, mm-hmm, yes. And how does that make you feel? Mm-hmm. Yes. And how does that make you feel? Like, that's a myth, right? Well, I'm sorry. You have to debunk these for me. I am not the therapy expert. So is that true? Is that what happens in your office?
Yeah, I would say there is a piece of therapy that's about support, right? Like unconditional, compassionate support, like that. Mm-hmm, I hear you, I see you, right? Like, of course, that's going to be a small part of what therapy is, but it's definitely not the drill, right? We don't hang out on a Chase lounge in the office, right? And it's definitely different. But really, the cool thing about therapy is there's so many different modalities. So, like, let's say you are in a place where you really do need somebody to just hear you, right? You're sick of people trying to force you out of your grief. You need to sit with it and have somebody really listen. Like, that's that kind of like, okay, I'm just in the space and I'm listening and I'm affirming. Like, there are therapists who can do that, but there are also like therapists who work with like the neurobiology of the trauma you've gone through. They help you reprocess, right? So there's all sorts of different things, different modalities, right? lots about, communication. For a lot of people, their internal world is not jiving with their family system, right? Maybe you live with a partner, with your children, and there's something going on there. So it's really getting into the nitty gritty of like how people communicate, how you identify your feelings and processing through all of that. Less of like, oh, just how you feel. Like, okay, well, there's this passive feeling and we're not really, going to do anything about it except for just, say, okay, you did a good job naming that feeling. So really like, no, like it's all over the board. And I think the interesting thing about therapy today, with that whole like, well, what can you expect, is really like you are the expert. Like as the client, when you come in, versus, and I think that's a big shift from like when therapy started or became more well known, throughout like, the 70s and 80s, the psychologist was the expert on you. And now we've kind of switched gears where you are the expert of your own life. So if you don't feel like your therapy is helpful, the field is really encouraging clients to speak up and say, hey, this isn't helpful. And sometimes that means even getting a whole new therapist, different, training, different whatever, right? Because the fit is the most important part. And it's really interesting. So I work at a practice that does what's called fit analysis, which means feedback informed treatment. So this is actually the third practice that I've worked for. And when I found this place, I was so excited to get to be a part of the team because we do clinical research about literally the connection between clients and their therapists and how that impacts their outcomes. So one of the things that they found, like comparing side by side with empirical data, like meds, CBT, EMDR, all these different kinds of therapy, is the biggest indicator of client success is the fit between the therapist and the client, like whether you really feel the therapist gets you and is helpful. And if that therapist really believes in the modality they're using. So it doesn't really matter, like CBT, EMDR, systems, right? Whatever modality you're kind of coming from. If the therapist believes that what they do is working and the client believes that they feel a connection with the therapist, that's the most helpful thing, as much as up to 4 times more helpful than medication, which is wild. So if you go to our website, thecoloradocenter.com, we've got all sorts of published articles about how fit works. So one of the things our practice does that's a little bit different is we actually ask every single session 3 different questions that are indicators of client wellness. Like, how are you feeling? How are you doing with your family? How are you doing in your day-to-day life with tasks? And we track those over time, as well as how they feel about the session themselves. Like, whether or not they feel heard, if we're on track, if it's actually helpful. And so over time, the idea is that we can sort of see like, oh, okay, this theory that we were kind of working on in these couple of sessions, they didn't connect so well. And they told us they weren't connecting by how they were feeling. So let's reroute it. And one of the reasons the practice decided to do this was some research that came out a while ago, 12 years ago, that said that 90% of therapists think that they are an above average therapist. So 90% of people think they're in, the 50 and above, right? And it's just not possible, right? And so the idea is like, we want to be able to help people, but we actually also want to know if we are or not. So that's part of the reason we ask.
And what an act of courage for a therapist to be able to do that, to be like, to really check in and, see if this is working. Cause, it's your career. And you, like you said, over 90% of therapists think that they are the bee's knees. And, so to have that relationship to where you can end it, is a big deal. And that brings up, yet again, another myth is that once they see a therapist, they're going to be with them for the rest of their lives. And you're saying that's not true.
Not at all. No. So I like to think of therapy more as like seasons of change, right? Sometimes you go in for a season of therapy that's 5 to 10 sessions. It's really brief. Like you got a new job, you're adjusting to a boss who gives you feedback really differently. Maybe it's triggering something from your past that you're sensitive to and it's making you anxious, right? And so you go in for a really brief stint of therapy to help figure out, okay, how do I process through this? How do I recognize some cycles of anxiety and how to pull myself out of it? And then some seasons of therapy are longer. Like maybe you've suffered a big loss or you're working on identity stuff that feels like you really need to take a lot of space. But generally, the idea is like a good therapist is always trying to sort of work themselves out of a job. There's the small percentage of clients who really stick around for a long time. And sometimes that's because you play a certain role in their life, right? You help contain something that they need over the long term. But for the vast majority of clients, really short-term therapy is a lot more common. And really, it's a lot more important because we don't want to be the person that you're dependent on to cope with your life. We want to help you process that, teach you what you need, and kind of hand you on, right? Like fly birdie, right? Like that kind of idea.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fun. It's a hard role to be in because like when you work with clients and you're there with them, you get close, like to get into that space to really be able to help. Like I grow attached to my clients. Like you really get to know them and have a level of compassion and care for them. So when they don't need you anymore, there's so much pride in them being better that feels so good. But there's also a little bit of grief there because, we learn to care about the people that we work with. I have clients that I worked with, 6, 7 years ago who will reach out every once in a while and just let me know how they're doing and check in. And I love it when that happens because it's nice to see, how things sort of play out over time.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, you're absolutely right. It is cool to be able to see people progress and improve their lives. And so we have a comment on here. So Rachel Faye Driver says hello, and I
Yeah.
think I introduced you guys. Yep.
Yeah.
And Rachel does marketing for therapists. She's
Mm-hmm.
incredible, and she's becoming a therapist herself. So pretty cool how we all kind of band together in one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have a guy named Keith who's commented on, and I'm sure he wouldn't mind if I share this because it's here on social media in the comments. And he says, I do have major depression and bipolar disorder, which causes me to have on and off suicidal thoughts. And Rachel asked, do you have someone to talk to? And he said, kind of. So
Mm-hmm.
what can you tell Keith?
So one of the things I think that's hard about, dealing with mood disorders like psychothymic or bipolar is a lot of people want to treat that depression like it's your run-of-the-mill depression. And if you do have bipolar, it's not. So like there's some new research out recently that says people with bipolar are actually born with it. Like that you can test stem cells in embryos and be able to find the genetic link that leads to bipolar and the communication in the brain that makes that depression cyclic. And I think a really important part of getting support is making sure that you see somebody who understands that your depression is not an adjustment. There's no external factor causing it and can really help you contain and learn how to deal with some of those fluctuations in moods. And so one of the really good resources in the therapy world is Psychology Today. So I would say, I don't know if maybe 80% is high, but a huge majority of clients have a profile on there. So people all over the state who take varying insurances, who work for grants, who work privately, they post profiles. And usually they have, videos, they have information on there. And so if you're dealing with something that feels specific and targeted, making sure you see somebody who specializes. So for instance, for Keith, here at my practice, I have a coworker, his name is Michael, but he's a bipolar specialist. He's a marriage and family therapist, been working for 30 years in the field. He actually wrote a book. It's called Owning Bipolar, and it's awesome. But it's all about the different ways that we learn to manage just what we're going through with mood disorders. So, be inquisitive, right? Check out lots of people when you're looking for a therapist because that fit is important. So like if you call a therapist and they're like, oh yeah, I've worked with people with bipolar, right? And you don't feel like they really get what you're going through, move on, right? Like trust your instincts, make sure you pick somebody who you feel really understands and can help you. The other thing is like give people a call. Like I probably get, 4 or 5 calls a week. Some turn into clients, some don't, but it's just the process of being able to help people find the right connections and fit, to make sure they end up with the right person. So like most therapists are more than happy to do a short call, make sure you get the resources you need, because really navigating the world of mental health, it's a mess. Like, let's just be honest. Like, it's not organized. There's no cohesive way to be like, okay, what tree in the mental health field, like what branch am I in? Where would I find this person?
Mm-hmm. So what's the office number if someone's listening to this and they want to call you guys to see, like, sounds like you have kind of like a buffet of therapists that they could really be matched with and get that fit match.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
What's y'all's telephone number?
So the main line is 303-547-3700. or you can always just call me directly, and it's kind of the same number. So it's 303-547-3595. So here at our practice, we actually have 8 different clinicians, 2 different offices. And if you go to thecoloradocenter.com, we all have videos where we kind of explain, what we do, what type of clients we see. And then even outside of our office, we're all connected with various organizations. And I think that's an important part of being a therapist too, is just recognizing you don't know it all. You'll never know it all. You'll never be an expert on everything. So making sure you stay connected with your team of therapists wherever you are, either it's in your office or it's in your community, because being able to collaborate is really important to being actually able to do good work and help people in a good way.
Yeah. Yeah. Big time. Big time. So another myth is people telling themselves, I'm not depressed, I've just got the blues. So they're telling themselves like, well, everyone has the blues and I'll be fine. And then I mean, how do you feel about that? Is that legit? Or what?
So that's one of the reasons that we do our research on wellness. So our scaling basically for this wellness measure we do is out of 0 to 30. And so if you are above a 19, you are clinically average, which just means like anybody walking around on the street somewhere between a 19 and 30. And if you're below that line, that means you're experiencing something specifically distressing, whether it's anxiety, trauma, depression, right? And I think the thing with depression is you don't have to meet a certain threshold where you're saying this is too much, right? Like a lot of people feel like, okay, until I feel like I am suicidal, I have a plan, I'm going to end up in the hospital, I can figure this out on my own, right? And a lot of people, that's actually usually how it plays out for a lot of people with depression, which is unfortunate because that's scary. Most people, we don't want you ending up in the hospital scared and without support, right? We're happy if you end up there and you seek support after and you learn to grow, that's great. But really at any point that you feel like something in your life is being affected negatively. So oftentimes people with depression, it's like, I feel foggy. Like I feel like I'm living my life with foggy glasses on. I don't feel particularly happy. I'm not crying every day, but I just don't enjoy the things I used to. I don't really listen to music like I did. And it's trying to get to the root of like, okay, what is that detachment about? Because sometimes depression looks more like a freeze response where it's just like a general numbing effect where you're complacent, and it's not particularly distressing. It might not be interrupting your life all that much, but you're not thriving either. And I think that's a big shift that's happening more recently, is we're really focusing on thriving and general wellness. Like you don't have to be a certain level of bad to seek help.
Oh, that's such a good point. You don't have to be a certain level of bad to seek help. So when people think of therapy, they might think of, oh, it's $150 an hour, or my insurance doesn't cover that. Like for example, my son's been seeing a therapist for years, just because I know the benefits of having someone to talk to outside the family. And so I thought, well, he deserves it too. Whatever I get for myself, I give him too. And he's only 10. We've been doing it since he was like 5. And he loves it. He likes having his person he can go talk to. And this school year, because so many of the schools are being cut, their budgets are being cut. Well, and the actual schools are being cut. Like we're not going to school. They cut the therapist budget, so now there's no school therapist for him. And so, how do you help people that want the help, but they make too much to where they can't be on Medicaid? Or they're self-employed and don't have insurance, or maybe they do and it's just the run of the mill insurance. It's not particularly good, or cover. I think they look at mental health as almost like a luxury, like unless you're being hospitalized for something physical, we're not really going to cover that. So how can people get over that? When they think, well, maybe I should just talk to someone, but they're cost prohibited. What do they do then?
Well, and I think that's a tricky one, right? It's difficult to navigate. It depends on your insurance, right? It depends on your resources, whatever you're willing to kind of do. And I think it does require some research. So many practices, like especially private practices. So I work for a private practice that does not accept insurance. So like, let's say you pay for therapy privately, like a practice like mine might be able to give you a receipt, and then you submit that to your insurance, and your insurance reimburses you their contracted rate. And maybe it's a fairly break even. Maybe you still end up paying a little out of pocket, right? There's solutions like that. There's also lots of grant funded programs where, part of the state, if you do your research, depending on where you live or why you might need to come in, you don't need to pay anything because the grant provides it. Maybe you are, your kid's in a school district and the school district offers that, right? There's also group therapy, which can be a really affordable alternative. So group therapy tends to be significantly less expensive than individual therapy. It tends to be offered like on a monthly basis. So let's say like, okay, you're joining this group, it's $110 a month, but you get 4 sessions, right, out of that. And that, that $35, $32-ish a session is much more affordable. The other thing to do is to ask, right? And to be honest, right, about your financial situation, because lots of practitioners are willing to take sliding fee clients at a significantly reduced rate than they might offer online. And some therapists even do pro bono work, where for a certain length of sessions, they'll do them for free. So I think just really being honest with your therapist and making sure, like, if you just truly cannot afford whatever their rate is with or without insurance, that you ask for those resources, because there's lots of state places to get connected, to make calls, that are specific to even certain areas. So like, for instance, let's say you're going through a loss, right? So here in Denver, we have Judy's House, and they offer all sorts of different kinds of therapeutic groups, family therapy, and it's covered, right, by their program that's supported for grief work. There's places like that specific to all sorts of different things, like victim advocacy, loss, trauma, right? All of it. It's just really taking the courage to kind of be vulnerable about where you're at and what you have, and finding that fit.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like the Colorado Center where you work at is such a great resource for people just to call, say, hey, here's what I'm going through. Here's where I'm at financially. Here's what insurance I have, even though you mentioned you guys don't take insurance, but you guys might, I'm sure you have a list of places that might take that insurance, or you can give them advice, call your insurance and see if we give you a receipt and you send it in, and then they can reimburse you, and all kinds of great tools. Judy's House, like another great one that people can turn to, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that's the thing, is like, all therapists, we kind of work behind the curtain, like a little bit like Oz, right? Like, and we know things that just the public might not know about the resources that are available. And it's part of staying connected to the helping community. So make sure you ask, because, you're not in the therapy world. You might be a mom, you might be a nurse, right? You might be in some other profession where you just wouldn't know that. And most of us, we're happy to help. Like, we do this because we love to. And you're never a burden by asking, even if you don't end up, at our practice.
Yeah, big time. And like you said, for Keith, he's on here, he's listening, he's still watching. And so yeah, Keith, what we're suggesting, he's sharing how many times he's been to the hospital, the last time he was suicidal, and I would just offer, like, or recommend, Keith, like, give Jackie's office a call and see what they can help with. And like she's saying, there's plenty of resources out there that might be able to help you out. So that's where it looks like the best resource for you would be to go.
Absolutely.
And then let's see. I really can't think of any other, like, big myths to debunk. Like right now, I'm wondering if anybody else has questions that's watching this about therapy, about like myths that you've heard or whatever, where this is just an awesome time because we have Jackie here who has nearly 10 years experience, and she's in this for the right reasons. And let's talk a little bit about both of our passion, right, for helping teen mental health and things along that line. So can you share that part of your heart with us and what people can do or what we can do to help?
Absolutely. So Alex and I, connected via Danae, who, got to know me over coffee and learned that, I'm very, very passionate about helping teens with anxiety and depression and with their families. So it was like a happenstance sort of thing after, I went to school and studied marriage and family therapy, which is very family and couples focused work. So when I graduated, I ended up taking a job that was grant funded in the city of Cheyenne at this place called Youth Alternatives. And so they offered community support to really anybody who needed it for family therapy. And then I just started to see such a massive theme of teenagers who were experiencing a lot of intense emotional pain and anxiety, and really scared parents who didn't know what to do, didn't know what to say. And the world that we live in today, like, I feel for these kids because the pressure that they're under is more than any other generation previous. Like, we're here having this virtual call because we can. When I was in high school, this was not a thing. We couldn't do this kind of thing. We could go home and get a break from our stress. And developmentally, teenagers their brains are literally going through things that make them more cognizant of how people perceive them. They have a sense of like pressure naturally of like, I need to be included, right? So we go through different developmental stages in our lives. And for teenagers, it's social inclusion, right? The need to be connected and accepted is like the need for food and water. It's huge, right? And so for a lot of these teenagers, either something's going in their family system or in their school life that's causing that to be very difficult. And, I think for a lot of people, when we think about suicide, I think one of the big myths is that a lot of people are doing it for attention, right? And with social media, it's become cool to be depressed, and it's a really hurtful thing for anybody to say publicly, especially for people who have depression and who experience suicidal thoughts. Is everybody has their own level of tolerance when it comes to emotional pain. And when people are self-harming or they feel suicidal, it's because they're reaching that tolerance, and they're needing help with how to figure out how to carry that emotional intensity. And that's scary, right? And sometimes parents who are scared, they say the wrong thing, they do the wrong thing because they're frightened, right? And they don't want to lose their loved one. They don't know what to do, right? And so I think that's such an important part about therapy, is helping parents, calm down in a way and have that support so that they can be there for their kids and help them learn how to cope with what they've got going on, or learn how to cope alongside with their kids. Because it's a scary place when you're experiencing really intense anxiety. And right now, the current generation has higher rates of anxiety, depression, suicide attempts than ever recorded. For many, many years, the most at-risk person for a suicide attempt was a man over 60. And now it's 14 to 17-year-old boys. And a lot of this has to do with, the pressure that they're under, how we treat them as a society with how they regulate and communicate about their emotions. And I think it's something that I'm passionate about, because all these kids, they have so much potential. They have these beautiful lives to be lived. And therapy can be a part of just figuring out, okay, how do I carry this intensity and still live a really fulfilling life? It doesn't mean it's something you have to necessarily squash or get rid of. Sometimes people are innately born, with some of these parts that feel darker, and learning how to accept those parts and learning how to carry them, it's really challenging. And it can be a journey, and many people need support with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm a mom to a 10-year-old boy, and a resource that really has helped me and continues to help me is parenting with love and logic, and not teaching the lessons for our kids. So for the parents that are watching or listening, it's, and I'm no expert, my son's only 10. So we have a whole nother 10 years to go and beyond, of course, I hope, with, learning how to communicate with each other and learning how to respect each other and talk to each other and talk things out. And in my experience, it's been easier and more graceful for us to just have good communication around what's going on. For example, yesterday oh God, here I go. I'm like, oh, I have an amazing example, but I can't remember what it is. But they happen so often. And when he gets upset, he'll go into his room and he'll shut the door and he just has to have quiet time by himself. And, and I keep having to practice, like just letting him be in there. Do I wish I had x-ray vision or to be able to see through the walls just to make sure he's okay? Like I hear a noise in the closet and I think, what is he doing in there? And it's like, so it's this fine line between respecting his space, but also knowing like, well, what are you doing in there? Because if I wait 2 minutes too long, it can be irreversible decision for either attention or just the pain, because mom doesn't understand, and these different things. So, and this is a really this is a personal question for me too. Like, how do parents, obviously he's had a therapist for a long time, just because of different things we've been through in our lives. And how does a mom or dad approaching their child that just needs that quiet space, especially introverts? He's a little bit of an introvert. Like, he needs his space. Me, I'm like, let's talk it out. I want to talk about every single little detail. Maybe that's just like the woman in me, but like, I'm an external processor. He's not so much. How does someone work through that?
Well, I think that's the scary part about being a parent is our emotional worlds are invisible, right? And for our kids, that's terrifying. If you have your son and he's in his room and you don't know if he's just a little annoyed and he's decided to play a video game for 15 minutes to cool off, or he's really ruminating about big questions. Like, I don't know how many times I've heard, 11-year-old, 12-year-old kids really wonder about who am I in my life? Am I important, right? These big meta concepts that we think people don't even ponder until they're adults. No, these kids are thinking that because they're smart, right? And so that's a scary thing as a parent. Like, is he really struggling? Is he not struggling? How do I help him? What's my role, right? And I think the big piece is just remembering, like, just like a therapist, parents are working themselves out of a job. And with your kids and with their emotions, it's teaching them how to emotionally regulate, right? Like, how to identify, hey, what's wrong with me? What do I need, right? To calm down, to be able to name the emotion, to express it if they need to, and to ask for what they need. Even if the asking is, I just really need some quiet time and space to sit with this, or no, I do need your help. Like, the stressor is too much for me, or I need you to hear me because I need somebody to understand the distress that I'm in. And the process of being able to say, okay, I'm upset, cool off, name it, figure out what I want. It's a skill that people are mastering for most of their lives, right? Like, it's not easy for kids. It's not easy for adults. And I think the role of most parents, which is super hard because it's sort of a little bit hands off, is this like idea of like a be with presence. Like, you want your kids to know, like, I see you. I see that you're struggling. I see that you're trying, and I'm here with you. And when you need help, you are the expert on you. You let me know. Or even like, this is where you can find me. I'm going to give you your space and I'm going to be in the living room in my chair, having my coffee. When you're ready, you can come to me and let me know. And we can talk or we can not talk. We could sit on the couch and, watch an episode of Friends together if that feels like that would be good. But helping kids understand that they do have some control in how they deal with their emotions is really going to help them cope. But it's a tough place to be as a parent, because lots of parents, they care so much and they love so deeply. They just feel like, I'm not doing enough. I want to fix them and I want to protect them. But you are protecting them by teaching them how to handle this stuff, because they can do it for the rest of their lives.
And that's what they talk about in Love and Logic is, your job is not to tell them what to do or not to do. I mean, we do in a way, we have to guide them, but the sooner parents can get on that and let them not burn their hand on the stove. That's a bit extreme, right? Like, that's going to take a lot of lavender oil and aloe. Like, that's maybe a hospital visit. Like, don't do that. But what we're saying is, let them fall, let them learn their lessons, because it's hard. It's like, as a parent, our hearts break even like double. At least this has been my experience, and other parents that I'm friends with, and their hearts break double what their child's is when they go through their first breakup, or when a friend bullies them at school or whatever. Like, it's hard, it hurts, because you want to help them with that. You want to help bring them back from that. So what does, and I don't have a teenager, so I wish we had, hopefully, some parents with teenagers will reach out to you and ask, for some advice. So with teenagers, what other do you have any other tips for what parents can do without, yelling matches or being like, I told you so, or, anything along those lines that really, no one wants to be told what to do, no matter what age you are, like even toddlers, they like,
Mhm.
flashback. So what can you do for your child that's like, um,
Mhm.
to help guide them without telling them what to do? And while you answer this, my house is extraordinarily quiet. So
Mhm.
you go ahead and answer that.
You're gonna go check on the
I'm just gonna
quiet.
check. Just gonna make sure, speaking of children, that my children are not, yeah, you understand. I'll be right
Oh,
back.
I
So
gotcha.
please answer that. That'd be
Okay,
awesome.
of course. So I think one of the things, to do with when your kids are struggling, especially with teenagers, I think teenagers just in general experience a lot more pressure. And so sitting down with them like you would a 25-year-old or a 40-year-old and saying, "Hey, like help me understand what you're going through." Like sometimes that just does not work as well. And I think for teenagers they need presence, right? It's let's go for a walk, and maybe this is a daily routine. You take your dog for a walk, and you ask them how they're doing. You have them share their life, and you let them know that you're a consistent person there for them. So I worked for, or was part of this mentoring program when I was in college, and they talk about this concept with teenagers of the walk and talk, that teenagers do so much better with expressing what they're doing when they don't have to make direct eye contact or feel like there's a specific answer we need right now. So you go for a walk, you're walking side by side, and you're talking. And I think for a lot of teenagers too, when we're talking about like getting to the root of their feelings, like don't be afraid to be direct. Like you don't just have to say, how was school, right? Because they're going to say fine, good, cool, right? Like whatever. We remember being teenagers and doing the same thing. It's totally fine to say like, hey, how are you feeling about your friends? Do you feel like they accept you? Like, and I think a lot of teenagers, that's been one of the most surprising things, is if a kid is not comfortable talking to you about something, they are going to let you know. They're going to tell you, nah, I don't want to talk about that right now. But a large majority of the time, they are not offended when you ask them specific questions. And if anything, I think they feel seen. And I think that's such a painful part of being a teenager today, is a lot of them don't feel seen by their support system. They're going to larger schools. Like my office here is right next to Cherry Creek High School. The school has, each class has 1,000 kids in it. And it's so important, to feel seen as a teenager. Identity and inclusion are really important. And when you have 900 and something classmates, it's difficult to feel important. And I think that's the role of parents. And on top of it is just to be cognizant of what messages are you sending to your kid when you're sitting down at dinner. Is your phone going off the whole time? Like we all have cell phones, all adults, we're distracted, we're working, but making sure like some of the time, like you really are there with your kids, you're seeing them. Doesn't need to be 100% of the time, right? We're all human. But I think just taking that effort to really say, I see you, I see what you're going through.
Well, and that's what a therapist can do for an adult too, because
Mhm.
a therapist can literally, they can say like, hey, I see you. I know work is a mess right now, or that family is a mess right now. Your whole life feels like a mess, but hey, I want you to know I see you. I
Mhm.
see the value that you bring to the world, and in who you are and where you're trying in life. And like, even though if you're trying and you're failing in this area, it's going to be okay. You're going to get back up. So whether you consider a therapist a mentor or a friend, someone to talk to, like someone that's in your support system, it can be so helpful. And in a way, a lot of, I guess that's another myth to debunk, right? Is that people think when they come to therapy, they're just going to have to talk about their childhood the whole time, right? Because that's my understanding, is that's where a lot of the trauma or a lot of deep seated beliefs start from when you're a child. And so, is that true when someone comes in? Are they going to spend the whole time that they're with you talking about their childhood and their parents and their upbringing? Because that can be kind of painful depending on where they grew up in or who they grew up with.
Mhm. No, not necessarily. I think it really depends on what you're working on. Like I have some clients where we barely tip on into what their childhood or their past was like. So with a couple, like maybe they're working on attachment stuff that's much more current, right? Like the way that each other is actively responding. And we might touch on the past to say, well, how did your parents respond to you when you were distressed as a kid? When you were upset, did they shut you out? Did they scream at you? Do you have some sensitivity to people being volatile because of your past? Is that making you more sensitive in your current relationship? So I think it's important not to ignore the past, because there's these little experiences that make us unique in our emotional, I don't know, how we react, our patterns that are ingrained. And sometimes when we go back and we decompress that and we understand it, we can have more self-compassion for the parts of us who've experienced, like, that have experienced that past. And we can be more cognizant of when it's kind of like driving the boat in our current life. So, like, I would say it's very rare to go to therapy and not touch on your past to some degree. You know, it's part of what defines you, but depending on what you're working on, it could be just a small portion, and it could be just like that, right? Like where you're talking about your current life and then something comes up and then you spend the next 5-10 minutes of the session saying, well, tell me what that was like when you were younger. Okay, does that make sense now? So how do you hold some space for that now in your current life? And then we move forward, because I think the idea of therapy is progress and thriving moving forward. We don't want you to feel stuck in the pain of your past. It's about figuring out like how to carry it as a piece of you, a substantial and important piece that you just, it's comes along with you into your future. We don't want you to be there forever.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. It is good to look back and see, well, based on where I've been, really determines where I am. It kind of determines where I'm at right now. And then if I want to move forward in a different direction, you gotta pivot. You know what I mean? I saw a quote the other day. It talked about being able to, like, we can't change where we're at immediately, but we can change the direction we're going immediately. And so start going in a new direction. And it works. So, so before we wrap up, let's talk a little bit about becoming a therapist for those people that are listening or watching, and they're thinking, I would love to help people. I'd love to be a therapist. I'd love to jump into the mental health space. How's it been for you? Like, okay, because I could imagine like nearly 10 years in the mental health space. Isn't that exhausting? Like, how do you?
Sometimes.
Yeah, sure. How do therapists have therapists? Like, how do you guys take care of yourself?
Yeah, I think learning how to manage your own emotions, your own self-care. Being a therapist is hard work. A lot of people, so I come home from work and I have a very specific thing that I do. I need quiet. I need to get outside. I need some things to help me wind down from my day right after a day of therapy. And part of the reason, people are like, well, why are you so tired? You just sit around and talk to people all day, right? Like, you didn't go anywhere. And it's like being in an argument, right? Like when things are emotional and intense, it's physically and emotionally draining. And that's part of the reason, like, the world of therapy has such a high burnout rate. I can't remember the percentage, but it's a huge majority of therapists don't make it past, 5 to 10 years of practice for this very reason, because it's exhausting. And one of the things I remember from my first year of practice, I went to Cheyenne, start working with the court and the school system. And a lot of these families I was working with, they were in a lot of distress, really going through some difficult things in their lives, and working with them was horrible. Not horrible in the sense of like it was painful, but it was pulling on your heartstrings in every direction. And there would be some days where I'm like, I cannot sleep. I can't stop thinking about them, because you care so much. But as a therapist, you only have so much control. And what my boss at the time, he told me, in order to get close enough to help, you have to get close enough to get hurt. And as a therapist, you need to find a way to manage that, because it's the beauty and it's the pain of the field. And it's so hard, because it shifts in your life. And there's sometimes, like, when you're going through something in your personal life, that's even going to affect who you are in your work and how you show up. And it's okay as a therapist to say, you know what, right now, like, I'm going through some stuff with my kiddo. I need to take a break from seeing kids right now, and I need to do that. And I think being really, just honest with yourself, and I think staying connected. It's like nurses and doctors, any of the helping professions where we see and hear hard things, we can't do it alone. I don't know how many different therapists over the years that I've confided in and learned from. And part of the reason I work for a group practice is because that's part of what we do for each other, is we support each other through the difficult parts of being a helper, and all of it. It's a tough field. There are some days when I describe it as having peely face syndrome, where I get home and I feel like I'm so tired, the muscles in my face don't feel attached because I'm like, oh my God, what's going on with my face? But I think it can be exhausting. So, really prioritizing your own self care, checking in on yourself, making sure you're working, and setting boundaries. Therapists see varying numbers of clients. So, at my previous practice, before my current one, I would see as many as 34 clients in a week, and I realized this is not sustainable. I can't do this. It's too much. And so now I work for a practice that really prioritizes, research and doing a lot of work specific to the learning of the clients. And I see a lot more like 15 to 20. And that feels a lot more manageable. And there's no shame in and being a person that can't, go 100% all the time. And I think learning how to check in with yourself on, what's hard for you about being a therapist and getting that support, it's such an important part of the process. And, I'm only 8 years in, so I'm still learning, every day I'm learning. And I think that's one of the fun pieces about working with professionals who've been in the field longer. So one of my coworkers who I was talking about earlier, Michael, he's in the same field. He's an LMFT like me, but he's been practicing 30 years. And sometimes we sit and we have coffee and we talk about our struggles as therapists. And some of his struggles are similar, and he's been practicing 3 times longer. And I think just being able to own that vulnerability of like, it's important work and it's hard work and managing both.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Gosh, 34 people in a week. That's a lot. That's a lot.
It was a bit much.
You have like administrative work that you need to do and ideas that you need to come up with to help that person move forward. And yeah, that's tough. And one last question. This is like I'm just curious question. When you're working with people and like when you have a friend, right? And this is more for like the audience, like you have a friend and you see it from the objective view. Like you have a friend who's in an abusive relationship and you see how that friend could totally get out and why they should get out. And you're frustrated for them. You're like, girl, you've been crying wolf about this guy for years. Like get out of the relationship. Or you see them going into another destructive relationship. Like, and this is just a very broad example. There's thousands of examples, I'm sure, where we see someone doing something and we think, gosh, don't you see you're going back into the same lion's den? Like you're signing up for the same thing. And it's obviously like because we believe, like we get what we believe we deserve. And so if we believe that we deserve to be in a relationship like that, then that's probably going to keep manifesting itself because we're not raising the bar. But how do you do that with clients? Like how can people with friends, or if people are therapists listening to this and they're just struggling with, or they thinking they want to be a therapist and they're like, yeah, I can change all these people's lives. And it's not so much, I think, about us changing their lives, maybe inspiring the change within them. But when you see that, that what that person, all the gaps that are in their life and what they need to do, how do you talk about the same thing all the time? Or like, what do you do there? How do you manage that?
Well, and I think that's the hard part about, being a friend. So I saw this meme the other day and it was, remember that scene in Sex and the City where Carrie Bradshaw's talking to Samantha about, I don't need a therapist, I've got you guys. And she's like, honey, it's the blind leading the blind. And I think that's the tricky part about like using your friends as therapists is they cannot be objective. They're too close. They care about you too much and their bias can make it hard to hear you. And when it comes to like making better choices, intrinsic motivation is kind of key, which just means like the motivation has to come from within. And sometimes that means sitting in that negative cycle, that unhealthy lifestyle. And as a therapist, you're helping them navigate that space. And maybe they're not leaving it yet. Maybe they're understanding like, okay, what is it about my history, my self-worth? So for a lot of people with relational trauma, it's about rewriting the narrative. I keep seeking these unhealthy relationships because I want to change the story. This time I want to be in a position of control where I'm not hurt. And therefore they seek a similar pattern, right? And getting to the root of that and unpacking that trauma, that might take some time and it might leave them in that unhealthy relationship for a space until they're ready to leave. And then when they are ready, they choose to do that with your support. So I think that's a misconception about therapy too, is that we just like, come in, let me tell you how to live your life, right? Let me tell you how to be happy. And that's not at all what it is. It's we support you in making the decisions that you know are the best for you. And sometimes they happen a lot slower than maybe your friends would like. Maybe your friends are super annoyed with the bad partner you've been choosing over and over again. And that's part of the reason maybe you're not talking to your friends about it anymore, because you know that they're annoyed with you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. I try to, I make a lot of new friends. Well, friends, I meet a lot of people. And if they're in a tough situation, I try to tell them a disclaimer, like, hey, if you stay with him or you leave him, like whatever you do, like it's all good. Like I'm not just, I won't listen about it.
Mm-hmm.
For very, like, you stay or leave, your choice. I understand love is difficult. Love, especially marriage, for the first 10 years is super. I've heard, man, that 7-year mark is really tough. I mean, I've never made it past a year in a relationship. Like I don't really do relationships. I don't date. I don't do any of that stuff. And it's because I know how much work it's going to take. So I'm like, oh, I just won't do, I'll put my work somewhere else. So it's a lot of work. And this is like totally bunny trailing here, but it's, it's like I said, having that therapist, someone that's unbiased, that's going to listen to you, that when you're paying someone to listen to the same story over and over again for 45 minutes to an hour, rightfully so. Friends you're not, time is money. And if it's going to be the same conversation over and over again, it's just eventually it's the wolf or the kid who cried wolf or whatever, so get a therapist, whether it's suicidal thoughts, whether it's your relationship, whether it's depression or anxiety or just frustration in your life. Like call the Colorado Center and talk to Jackie. Talk to one of her other therapists. Go to, you said www.thecoloradocenter.com. Go check it out. Psychology Today. There's also the crisis text line Rachel gave us for 741-741. Reach out, get some help, because people, and something else I learned from someone is just that people are always going to let you down. You know what I mean? Like it's just natural for your friends and family and your kids or your spouse, like they're going to let you down. So have someone, and maybe your therapist will too in a way, but like they're more likely they're going to really try to not let you down. They're going to try to be on your side. They're going to try to give you some good ideas. So reach out. Don't be afraid. And Jackie's a great person to do that with. She's just incredible. So girl, I really appreciate you being on here today. Is there anything else that you want to share with us before we wrap up?
I just want to thank you for inviting me and letting me talk about what I love, to your friends and people watching the show. And I think, the big takeaway is just be brave, right? When you're struggling, it's a painful place to be, but there are people there to support you. And don't be afraid to make the call and say, hey, I'm lost. I need some help in figuring out how to get there, because there are people who want to help you. And of course, you're welcome to call me, if ever you're in that place and you need some direction.
Awesome. Well, you're amazing. I can't wait. Hopefully we can have you back next time and talk more about this. With everything that's going on, I think a lot of people need to reach out and talk.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Well, till next time, I'll end the broadcast and then you and I can hop off and we'll chit chat.
Sounds good. Thanks, Alex.
All right. You're welcome.